pages in your interactive notebook are over your properties. So we have our commutative property of multiplication, we have our associative property of multiplication, and then the new one is the distributive property. I will be doing another video on just the distributive property that you will start working on. I believe it's tomorrow, which is Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and go over these 2 pages that go in your interactive notebook. The first one looks kind of like honey pots, where the honey is kind of oozing over the jar. You'll want to cut out your standard. You want to cut out and glue down the tab. We want to be able to open and close these boxes. And then at the bottom, it has your definitions. It says commutative property. You can multiply in any order, like 2 times 3 is 6, or 3 times 2 is 6. Associative property says it doesn't matter how you group numbers to multiply. For example, we can group 2 and 4 together first and then times 3, or we can group 4 and 3 together first and then times 2. The distributive property, you get the same answer when you multiply a number by a group of numbers added together, just as you do if you multiplied them separately. And we'll be looking at this distributive property a whole lot more Friday and Monday. So it says 3 times, parentheses, you see 2 plus 4. There's a difference, that plus sign, which just means we're going to be distributing the 3 to the 2, 3 times 2, and then we're also going to distribute the 3 to the 4, 3 times 4, and once you get those 2 answers, you add them together. We'll be working on the distributive property. All right, let's look at each one of these boxes and see if we can't figure out which multiplication property that it is talking about. So let's look at the first one. All the first one shows is 3 times 4. What property would 3 times 4 be telling us about? Well, this would be your commutative property, because we can take 3 times 4, and if we don't know 3 times 4, we can switch the order of those numbers. So underneath this tab, we're going to write commutative, C-O-M-M-U-T-A-T-I-V-E. This is our commutative property. And commutative property tells us if we do not know 3 times 4, then we can switch the order and do 4 times 3. What would our answer be of either one of these problems, 3 times 4 or 4 times 3? What would our answer be? 12, yes. So both sides would equal 12. So we're going to put a 12 right here inside of our box for 3 times 4. So that's the commutative property, switching the order of the numbers. All right, let's look at our second box. We have 8 times, parentheses, we have 5 plus 2. Now, when I first looked at this, my mind said associative because I saw those parentheses. But the reason this is not associative is because of that plus sign in the middle. So this is the new property, which is distributive, D-I-S-T-R-I-B-U-T-I-V-E. So let's look at what a distributive property does. Distribute means to give out. If I come into the classroom on November 30th and I bring a big, huge bag of candy and I say I'm going to distribute this candy to all the students in this room, what does that mean I'm going to do? I'm going to give the candy out. Now, you might get upset if I gave 10 pieces to the first student and only 2 pieces to the next student. That wouldn't be fair, would it? So when we distribute, what we've got to remember is we've got to give everybody the same amount. So the number that we're distributing is the 8, because 8 is on the outside of this parentheses. So that means we're going to be giving 8 to the 5. So we're going to need to say 8 times 5. And then we're also going to give the 8 to the 2. So we're going to say 8 times 2 as well. Now, in between both the 5 and the 2 is a plus sign. I'm going to keep between those 2 problems a plus sign. So now we're going to work out both sides. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 8 times 2 is 16. We always do multiplication before addition. Multiplication comes first before addition. Now, to get the answer, I'm going to simply add 40 and 16, which we know is 56. Now, another way that we're going to use distributive property is we're going to learn how to take a big number and break it apart into two small numbers like 5 and 2. If I put 5 and 2 together, because we learned parentheses first, King parentheses told us that, 5 and 2 is what? 7. So this problem is actually 8 times 7. We would get the same answer that we got when we said 8 times 5 plus 2. Since 5 plus 2 is 7, 8 times 7 is also 56. That's just some extra information there for you. So on the outside, we're going to put our 56. So we know that answer. This is the distributive property. And we're going to work a whole lot more on this distributive property. So I know that's new. It's the only box here, so don't get upset if that was the one you struggled on. We're going to practice that some more all next week. All right, let's look at our next one. We have 9 times 6. So again, this looks just like the first one we did. This is our commutative property. So M-M-U-T-A-T-I-V-E. Commutative says we can take a problem like 9 times 6 and we can switch the order of those factors. So we can do 6 times 9. If we didn't know 9 times 6, we could flip that and do 6 times 9. What is 6 times 9? We're working on our sixes. 54. Very good. So the commutative property, and we know the answer is 54. All right, last one on this page. You have 3 times, parentheses, 5 times 2, parentheses. So you see we only have time signs. So this tells me this is not distributive. Distributive would need a plus sign. This only has times. So that means this is our associative property. A-S-S-O-C-I-A-T-I-V-E. Associative. Associative says we can take factors and we can change their groups. So let's say I didn't like doing 5 times 2 first. So I want to take this and switch the groups. So instead of 5 and 2 first, I'm going to put 3 and 5 together in parentheses. We're just changing the group. Now, me personally, I like the 5 times 2 together. I wouldn't want to switch that one, but you could because the associative property says I could. If we work out both sides, we do parentheses first. That gives us 3 times 10, which is 30. If I do the other side first, we do 3 times 5, which is 15, and 2 15s is also 30. So we still get 30 on both sides of our problem. The associative property says we change our groups. So our answer to this one, of course, is 30. So once again, commutative, we change the order. Commutative, down here we change the order. Associative, we changed our groups. And our newest one, distributive, we distribute the 8 to everybody on the inside of those parentheses. 8 went to the 5 and 8 times went to the 2. Okay? You have another page I want to go over on this video that is about also properties. This time though, they tell you the property and they give you the problem and they just want you to work it out. So again, you want to cut out your standard, glue it at the top. You want to cut out your foldables, glue them on the tab, and then you want to cut out your definitions. Now this is the same as what you saw on the other page. It tells you the definition of commutative, changing the order, associative, changing the groups. I'm going to circle order and group there. And distributive, you get the same answer when you multiply a number by a group of numbers added together. So we're making smaller numbers when we multiply during distributive, and we'll look at one of those. Okay? So let's start with the commutative property up here at the top. It says 6 times 8, and they want us to use the commutative property. We know that that means order. So instead of 6 times 8, we're going to switch our order. And so our order is going to be 8 times 6. 6. So we know 6 times 8 is the same as 8 times 6. 6 times 8, the cake is for the 8. 8 times 6, the cake is still for the 8, isn't it? So we get 48 on both, and that is the commutative property, changing the order. All right, let's look at the associative property. The associative property says we're going to keep our order, but we're going to change our groups. So under here, we see that they have first grouped 4 times 7 together, and then they want to multiply that by 10. We're going to change that. Instead of putting 4 and 7 together, we're going to put 7 and 10 together. We're just changing our groups on this one, changing the groups. So let's work out both sides. 4 times 7 is 28. 28 times 10 on this side. We have a drop down 0 rule. We can drop that 0 on down, and 28 times 1 is 28. 28, anything times 1 is the other number. So that's pretty big, 280. If we do the other side, we get 4 times 70 because 7 times 10 is 70. Again, I have a drop down 0 rule. I can drop that 0 right on down. And 4 times 7 is 28 again. So either way, no matter how we group them, we still get 28 on both sides. 280. Sorry, I forgot my 0. 280 on both sides. That's the associative property, changing our groups. Again, we're going to do associative property, but notice this time they didn't put them in a group, so we're going to pick how we want to group them. So our problem is 6 times 5 times 4. How would you like to group them together? I always like to put the smaller factors together, so I'm going to group the 5 and 4 together. Now you group 6 and 5 together, that's fine. You can do it that way. I just like to put those smaller factors together to start with a smaller number. So if I work it this way, I'm going to get 6 times 20 because 5 times 4 is 20. Again, I have a drop down 0 rule, and 6 times 2 is 12, so 120. Well, what would happen if you did it on the other side? What if I did 6 and 5 together first, then times 4? Well, then you would get 30 times 4. Again, I can drop down my 0. 4 times 3 is 12. So either way that you grouped it, whether you grouped 5 and 4 first or 6 and 5 first, it shouldn't matter. You should still get the answer of 120. That's the associative property. All right. This is your newest one. You'll see the distributive property here. And what you're going to notice is there's a plus sign in the middle of these two problems. So when I rewrite this, what I'm actually going to do is I want to put those two problems in their own separate parentheses is what I want to do. I think that makes a little more sense where I can see them. Okay. Now, this 24 times 2, that's big. We have not learned double-digit multiplication yet, but we have learned that multiplication is repeated addition.